A defense contractor worth billions stands alone on a frozen bridge, ready to end everything on the anniversary of his wife's death. The pills are in his pocket. The note is written. His final decision is made. Then a child's voice cuts through the winter wind. "Why are you crying?" That single question, asked by a fearless 7-year-old in a purple coat, will pull him back from the edge and ignite a transformation powerful enough to challenge the ruthless empire he built. Sometimes salvation comes not from wealth or power, but from the unexpected compassion of strangers who see your pain and refuse to let you face it alone. Wait, before we continue, I need you to do something right now. If you want to see what happens next, if you want to know whether Paul actually jumps from that bridge, whether this little girl's compassion is enough to save a broken billionaire, and what happens when a man worth billions loses everything that truly matters, then you need to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. Because I promise you, the next 15 minutes will completely shatter you and then put you back together in the best way possible. This isn't just another story. This is about one question from a fearless child that changes everything. So subscribe now. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever been saved by a stranger's kindness. And let's continue this journey together. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens when Paul walks into that diner. Now, let's get back to that frozen bridge. The Longfellow Bridge stretched across the Charles River like a spine of frozen steel, its arches glittering with ice under the December sky. Paul Dickerson stood at the railing, his $4,000 cashmere overcoat doing nothing to stop the cold that had settled into his bones. Below him, black water moved sluggishly between sheets of ice, and beyond, the Boston skyline blazed with Christmas lights he couldn't bear to look at. His gloved hands gripped the iron rail. In his right pocket, the pill bottle pressed against his ribs, a small, hard promise of silence. In his left, his phone buzzed relentlessly with messages he would never answer. The board, his lawyers, people who thought Paul Dickerson, founder and CEO of Dickerson Dynamics, gave a damn about fourth-quarter projections. He didn't. 1 year ago today, Charlotte had died in their bedroom, her hand in his, her breath growing shallower until it simply stopped. Cancer had stolen her methodically, cell by cell, and all his billions, every satellite contract, every weapon system, every government connection, had been powerless to stop it. He'd sat beside her hospital bed for 3 months, watching machines measure the final mathematics of her life, and when she was gone, he'd returned to an empty house that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime, but contained exactly nothing worth living for. The wind sliced across the bridge, carrying voices from the city behind him. Laughter, car horns, the distant sound of Christmas carols. Normal people doing normal things. Paul had forgotten what normal felt like. He'd spent the last year moving through his life like a ghost, attending meetings he didn't care about, signing documents that meant nothing, maintaining the machinery of his empire because he didn't know what else to do. His sister Joanna had threatened to fly up from Florida. His lawyers had suggested grief counseling. His doctor had prescribed antidepressants he'd never taken. None of them understood. The problem wasn't depression. The problem was clarity. Paul had finally seen his life for what it was, a monument to efficiency and profit, built by a man who'd confused net worth with human value. He'd created weapon systems that killed people in 17 countries. He'd laid off 3,000 workers to boost stock prices. He'd missed Charlotte's chemo appointments because of board meetings, and when she'd needed him most, he'd been reviewing contracts for a missile guidance system that would make him another $50 million. What was the point of surviving her if this was all he was? The pill bottle shifted in his pocket as he leaned forward slightly, testing his weight against the railing. It would be simple, quick. The water was cold enough that unconsciousness would come fast. He timed it carefully, Christmas Eve, late afternoon, when most people were home with their families. No one to interrupt. No one to save him from himself. "Mister, why are you crying?" The voice was small and startled him so badly he nearly lost his grip on the railing. Paul turned and found a little girl standing 3 feet away, bundled in a bright neon purple coat with cat ears on the hood. Mismatched mittens hung from strings attached to her sleeves. She was missing a front tooth, and her dark eyes studied him with the unsettling directness only children possessed. "I'm not." Paul stopped, realizing his face was wet. He'd been crying without knowing it. "You look sad," the girl continued, tilting her head. "Like a sad snowman. Are you cold? I have an extra hand warmer." She dug into her pocket and produced a small orange packet, already lukewarm, and held it out to him with complete seriousness. Paul stared at the hand warmer, then at the child, his mind struggling to process this interruption. He'd planned everything so carefully. Where had she even come from? "Lily." A woman's voice cut through the wind, sharp with panic. "Lily, get back here right now." The girl, Lily, didn't move. She pushed the hand warmer closer to Paul. "You should take it. Mama says sharing makes people feel better." A woman appeared, hurrying toward them, her practical winter coat worn thin at the elbows. Her dark hair was clipped back hastily, and her face was pale with a kind of exhaustion Paul recognized, the look of someone who'd been running on fumes for too long. She grabbed Lily's shoulder, her eyes moving quickly between her daughter and Paul, assessing. "I'm so sorry," the woman said, breathless. "She got away from me. Lily, we talked about approaching strangers." "But Mama, he's crying." Lily's voice carried the unshakable logic of childhood. "Nobody should cry alone on Christmas Eve. You always say that." The woman's gaze locked onto Paul's face, and something in her expression shifted. She didn't see the expensive coat or the watch or the aura of wealth and power. She saw something else entirely. Recognition flickered across her features, not of who he was, but of what he was. Someone drowning. Her grip on Lily's shoulder loosened slightly. "Are you all right?" Her voice was gentler now, careful. "Do you need me to call someone?" Paul's throat was too tight to answer. His hand was still halfway to his pocket, frozen in place. He'd been seconds away. Seconds. And now this woman and her daughter were standing here, watching him with concern that felt more genuine than anything he'd experienced in a year. "There's no one to call," he finally managed, his voice rough. "Your daughter is very kind. You've raised her well." The woman bit her lip, clearly wrestling with something. Lily tugged on her coat. "Mama, remember what you said? When someone looks like they're about to disappear, you don't let them. You make them stay." The woman closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, Paul saw her decision forming. "My name is Vivian Branson," she said. "This is my daughter, Lily. There's a diner 2 blocks from here. It's warm, and they have terrible coffee, but it's open. Would you?" She hesitated, then continued with quiet determination. "Would you please come with us? Just for a little while." Paul looked at her, at this stranger offering him warmth when she had every reason to walk away. His hand closed around the pill bottle in his pocket, but he didn't pull it out. Something about Lily's fearless compassion, about Vivian's steady gaze, had broken through the fog. "My name is Paul," he heard himself say. "And yes, if you're certain, I'd like that very much." Joe's Diner was exactly what Vivian had promised: fluorescent lights, cracked vinyl booths, and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the Carter administration. But it was warm, and the waitress didn't blink when they walked in, just pointed them toward a booth by the window with a tired smile. Lily claimed the seat next to Paul immediately, swinging her legs onto the table and studying him with unabashed curiosity. Vivian slid in across from them, ordering hot chocolates for Lily and herself and coffee for Paul, who wasn't sure he could stomach anything but welcomed the ritual of having something to hold. "So," Lily announced, placing her hands flat on the table like she was chairing a board meeting, "why were you on the bridge being sad?" "Lily," Vivian started, but Paul shook his head. "It's all right." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup the waitress had just delivered, letting the heat seep into his frozen fingers. "How did you explain grief to a 7-year-old? How did you tell a child that sometimes living hurt more than dying?" "My wife died," he said finally. "Exactly 1 year ago today. I was on the bridge because I didn't know how to be in the world without her." Lily nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "My daddy died too," she said. "I was really little, so I don't remember him much. But Mama says he's still with us, just different. Like a star we can't touch, but can still see." Paul felt something crack in his chest. "I'm sorry about your father." Thank you. Lily took a careful sip of her hot chocolate, leaving a whipped cream mustache. Were you going to jump off the bridge? Lily. Vivian's face flushed with mortification. You can't just. Yes, Paul said quietly. I was. The admission hung in the air between them. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. Lily's expression grew very serious. I'm glad you didn't, the girl said. Because then you wouldn't be here, having hot chocolate with us. And that would be sad. It would be, Paul agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. Vivian cleared her throat, visibly composing herself. Paul, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you safe to go home tonight? Or do I need to call someone, a friend, a family member, to be with you? Paul thought about his empty mansion in Beacon Hill, the staff he'd sent home early for the holiday, the note he'd left on his desk that no one would find until after Christmas. He thought about the pills still in his pocket. I have a sister, he said. Joanna. She's in Florida, but she'd come if I called. Will you call her? Vivian's gaze was steady, unflinching. Tonight. Paul looked at Lily, who was methodically eating the whipped cream off her hot chocolate with a spoon, completely absorbed in her task. He looked at Vivian, this stranger who'd chosen compassion over caution, who'd brought him to a diner instead of leaving him on that bridge. He thought about Charlotte, who'd believed in random acts of kindness, who'd always said the universe put people in your path for a reason. Yes, he said. I'll call her tonight. Promise. Lily looked up from her hot chocolate, whipped cream still on her nose. I promise. They sat in the diner for 2 hours. Lily told Paul about her school, her best friend Emma, and the hamster she desperately wanted for Christmas. Vivian shared, haltingly, about her work as a nurse at Mass General, about the impossibility of raising a daughter alone, about the constant juggling act of bills and childcare, and trying to keep your head above water. Paul listened. He didn't offer solutions or money or the kinds of connections that usually tumbled out when he talked to people. He just listened, and somewhere in the middle of Lily's enthusiastic explanation of why hamsters were the best pets ever, he realized he was actually present in the moment for the first time in a year. When they finally left the diner, the snow had started again, soft flakes drifting down through the streetlights. Vivian walked Paul to his car, a Tesla he'd left parked near the bridge, hoping someone would steal it and save him the trouble. Will you really call your sister? She asked, her breath fogging in the cold air. Yes. Paul pulled out his phone and showed her Joanna's contact. I'll call her as soon as I get home. Vivian hesitated, then pulled out her own phone. I'm going to give you my number. If you start feeling dark again, if the thoughts come back, you call me. I don't care what time it is. Understand? Paul saved her number, his hands shaking slightly. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Because 5 years ago, I was where you are. Vivian's voice was quiet but firm. After my husband died, I stood in my bathroom with a bottle of his pain pills, trying to figure out if I had the courage to take them. My mother found me. She took the pills away and sat with me until I could breathe again. You needed someone to sit with you tonight. That's all. Lily appeared beside them, having finished her hot chocolate inside. She looked up at Paul and, without warning, threw her small arms around his waist in a fierce hug. Don't be sad anymore, okay? She said, her voice muffled against his coat. Or, if you have to be sad, call Mama. She's really good at making sad people feel better. Paul knelt down, so he was eye level with her. Thank you, Lily, for the hand warmer and for talking to me on the bridge. You're a very brave girl. I know, she said matter-of-factly, then grinned her gap-toothed grin. As Paul drove home through the snow-quiet streets of Boston, he pulled the pill bottle from his pocket at a red light. He looked at it for a long moment, then rolled down his window and threw it into a trash can on the corner. When he walked into his house, he went straight to his study and called Joanna. She picked up on the second ring. Walter, it's almost midnight. What's wrong? I need you to come to Boston, he said. Tonight, if you can. Tomorrow, if you can't. I need help, Joanna. I almost did something terrible tonight, and I need help. There was a sharp intake of breath. I'm booking a flight right now. Don't go anywhere. Promise me. I promise. Paul looked at the note he'd left on his desk, picked it up, and tore it into pieces. I'm not going anywhere. Joanna arrived at 7 a.m., her silver hair still perfect despite the red-eye flight, her face lined with worry and fury in equal measure. She'd let herself in with the spare key she'd kept since Charlotte died, and Paul found her in the kitchen, making coffee with the precision of a surgeon. "Sit," she commanded, pointing at the kitchen island. Paul sat. Joanna poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of him, then took the seat opposite. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, and Paul saw her cataloging the weight he'd lost, the hollowness in his eyes, the defeated slump of his shoulders. "Tell me everything," she said. "And don't you dare lie to me, Paul Dickerson." "I'll know." So he told her. About the year of numbness following Charlotte's death. About the pill bottles he'd collected from different pharmacies. About the bridge, the plan, the note. About Lily and Vivian and the diner and the choice he'd made to keep living for one more day. When he finished, Joanna sat very still. Then she did something Paul hadn't expected. She slapped him across the face. "That's for scaring me half to death," she said, her voice shaking. "And this," she pulled him into a crushing hug, "is because I love you and I'm not letting you go anywhere." They sat there for a long time, Paul crying into his sister's shoulder while she held him like he was still the little brother who'd skinned his knees learning to ride a bike. "Here's what's going to happen," Joanna said when he'd finally stopped shaking. "First, you're going to eat something. Real food, not whatever processed garbage you've been surviving on. Second, you're going to call that therapist Charlotte wanted you to see before she died. Dr. Patricia Reeves. You still have her number?" Paul nodded. "Third, you're going to open Charlotte's letter." Paul went rigid. "I can't. You can't keep living in limbo, Paul. She wrote you that letter because she knew you'd need it. It's time. What if it makes everything worse? What if it helps?" Joanna's eyes softened. "You won't know until you read it." But Paul couldn't face the letter. Not yet. Instead, he focused on the immediate tasks, calling Dr. Reeves and setting up an appointment, eating the breakfast Joanna forced on him, and texting Vivian to let her know he was okay. Her response came quickly, "Glad to hear it. Lily wants to know if you're coming back to visit. No pressure, but you're welcome anytime." Paul stared at the message, something warm and unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Connection. The possibility of it, anyway. Later that morning, Joanna insisted on accompanying him to his office. "You're not making any major decisions alone right now," she said firmly. "And I want to see what's been happening at Dickerson Dynamics while you've been checked out." What they found disturbed them both. In Paul's absence, physical presence aside, his CFO Bob McKinnon had been quietly implementing policy changes that prioritized profit margins over everything else. Vendor contracts restructured to squeeze smaller suppliers. Health benefits reduced for lower-level employees. Safety protocols loosened at manufacturing facilities to increase production speed. "How long has this been going on?" Paul asked his assistant, Maria, a woman who'd worked for him for 15 years and had never pulled punches. 6 months, maybe more." Maria's expression was carefully neutral, but Paul caught the disapproval beneath. "Mr. McKinnon said you'd approved everything." "I approved nothing," Paul said, ice forming in his voice. It was the first time in a year he'd felt anything besides grief, and what he felt now was rage. Clarifying, purposeful rage. He'd built Dickerson Dynamics over 40 years, and yes, he'd prioritized profit. He'd made ruthless decisions. But he'd never deliberately endangered his workers or screwed over the small businesses that depended on his contracts. Bob had taken advantage of Paul's grief to turn the company into something uglier than it had ever been. "Get Bob up here," Paul told Maria. Now, while they waited, Joanna pulled up spreadsheets on Paul's computer. "These numbers are impressive," she admitted. "Profits up 18% year over year. But Paul, look at the turnover rates. You're losing experienced people. And these incident reports." She scrolled through a document. 3 injuries at the Waltham facility in the last 2 months alone. Paul felt sick. He'd been so consumed by his own pain that he'd stopped paying attention to the pain he was causing others. Charlotte would have been horrified. Bob arrived 10 minutes later, all smiles and confidence. "Paul, good to see you in the office." And Judge Hammond, what a pleasure. He'd always been good at reading rooms, at saying the right thing. "Sit down, Bob," Paul said. Something in his tone made Bob's smile falter. He sat. "I've been reviewing the changes you've implemented over the past 6 months," Paul continued. "The vendor contracts, the benefits reductions, the safety protocol modifications. Walk me through your thinking." Bob's confidence returned. "Simple business sense, Paul. We were leaving money on the table. These adjustments increased our margins significantly while maintaining operational efficiency." "At what cost?" "Cost." Bob looked puzzled. "The numbers speak for themselves. We're more profitable than we've ever been. 3 workers injured at Waltham. 5 vendors who've supplied us for 20 years now struggling to stay in business because we cut their margins. Employee turnover up 32%. Paul's voice was very quiet, very controlled. "Those are costs, Bob. Those are acceptable trade-offs for shareholder value." Paul stood slowly. "You're fired." Bob blinked. "Excuse me." "You're fired. Effective immediately. Maria will escort you out. You'll receive your severance package as outlined in your contract, but I want you out of this building in the next hour." "Paul, you're not thinking clearly." Bob's face flushed. "You've been grieving, we all understand that, but these are sound business decisions." "I said get out." After Bob left, sputtering threats about legal action, Joanna turned to Paul. "That felt good, didn't it? Being angry instead of empty." It had. For the first time in a year, Paul had felt something sharp and real and directed outward instead of inward. "I need to fix this," he said quietly. "Not just Bob's damage. All of it. The whole system. I built a company that treats workers like expendable resources and vendors like obstacles to profit. Charlotte would have hated what we became." "Then change it," Joanna said simply. "You have the power to do that." Paul looked out his office window at the Boston skyline, thinking about Vivian juggling an impossible schedule as a nurse, about Lily's innocent faith that kindness mattered, about all the people working for him who deserved better than they were getting. "I don't know where to start." "Start with one thing," Joanna suggested. "The vendor contracts. The safety protocols. Pick one and fix it. Then pick another. You can't save everyone overnight, but you can start making different choices." Paul nodded slowly. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't enough to atone for a year of negligence or a lifetime of prioritizing profit over people. But it was something. A direction. A reason to keep going that extended beyond just surviving another day. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. "Lily made you a card. Can we drop it off sometime?" Paul found himself smiling. A real smile, small and fragile but genuine. "I'd like that," he typed back. "How about dinner tomorrow? My treat. There's something I'd like to talk to you about." Over the next 3 months, Paul threw himself into transforming Dickerson Dynamics with the same intensity he'd once applied to building it. He started with the safety protocols, personally visiting the Waltham facility and meeting with workers who told him about near misses and ignored concerns. He fired the plant manager who'd prioritized production over safety and hired someone recommended by the workers themselves. The vendor contracts came next. Paul called each supplier Bob had squeezed, apologized personally, and renegotiated terms that were actually sustainable for small businesses. Some of the owners cried on the phone. Others were suspicious, waiting for the catch. There was no catch. He restructured the benefits package, restoring coverage Bob had cut and adding mental health support, something he wished had been there for him when Charlotte was dying. The cost was significant, but Paul didn't care. Some things mattered more than margins. Vivian and Lily became regular fixtures in his life. Lily loved Paul's mansion, particularly the library, where she'd sprawl on the floor with picture books while Paul and Vivian talked. Vivian shared stories from the hospital, the impossible situations nurses faced, the bureaucratic nightmares, the patients who fell through cracks in the system because they didn't have money or insurance or anyone to fight for them. "The thing people don't understand about poverty," Vivian said one evening, "is how exhausting it is. How much mental energy it takes to constantly calculate whether you can afford groceries and rent in the same week. How impossible it is to think about dreams like college or medical school when you're drowning in right now? Paul thought about his own privilege, the way he'd never had to choose between food and medicine, never had to work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. He thought about Vivian's intelligence and competence, how she'd be an incredible doctor if the system wasn't designed to keep people like her out. What if someone removed the financial barriers? He asked. Would you go back to school? Vivian laughed, but there was pain in it. That's a nice fantasy. I'm serious. What if I funded your medical school, tuition, living expenses, everything, as a no-strings-attached grant? She stared at him. Paul, you can't just. I can actually. I have more money than I'll ever need, and Charlotte always believed in investing in people. You saved my life, Vivian. Let me invest in yours. I saved your life by not letting you jump off a bridge. That's not something you owe me for. This isn't about debt. Paul leaned forward. This is about recognizing potential that's being wasted because our system is broken. You should be a doctor. You have the intelligence, the compassion, the drive. The only thing stopping you is money, and I have more than enough to solve that problem. Tears spilled down Vivian's cheeks. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. But the real transformation at Dickerson Dynamics faced serious resistance. The board was increasingly hostile, led by Charles Pemberton, a majority shareholder who'd been pushing for more aggressive growth strategies. Your recent decisions are concerning, Charles said during a tense board meeting in March. Profits are down 6%. Our competitors are gaining market share. And you're spending money on employee wellness instead of R&D. Our employee retention has increased 28%, Paul countered. Our safety incidents are down 40%. Worker productivity is actually up because people aren't constantly worried about getting injured or fired. Feelings don't show up on balance sheets. Neither does a workforce that's burned out and disengaged. Paul kept his voice level. I'm building a sustainable company, not an efficient machine that chews people up. You're building a charity, Charles shot back. And shareholders don't invest in charities. They invest in returns. The meeting ended with a vote of no confidence that passed by 1 vote. Paul had 30 days to show improved financials or face removal as CEO. He called Vivian that night, his hands shaking. I might lose the company. Because you're treating people like human beings? Because I'm not extracting maximum profit from them, apparently. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Paul, what would Charlotte say? Paul closed his eyes, picturing his wife's face. She'd say that losing a company isn't the same as losing yourself. That who you are matters more than what you own. Then you already know what to do. The 30 days Paul had been given felt like 30 years. Every morning, he woke up with his chest tight, checking financial reports with dread. The numbers were stubborn. Profits remained down, though not catastrophically. Employee satisfaction was up, turnover was down. But those metrics didn't translate to the immediate gains the board demanded. Then Vivian called with news that changed everything. One of the nurses she worked with had a brother who was a journalist at the Boston Globe. He'd been hearing stories about what Paul was doing at Dickerson Dynamics, the safety improvements, the vendor renegotiations, the benefits restoration. He wanted to write a feature. I didn't tell him anything confidential, Vivian assured Paul. But word gets around. People are talking about what you're building. The article ran on a Sunday, front page of the business section. The headline read, Defense Contractor Chooses People Over Profits and Lives to Tell About It. It detailed Paul's transformation, the personal crisis that had sparked it, and the ripple effects throughout the company. Workers were interviewed. Vendors shared their stories. Even some competitors grudgingly admitted that Paul's approach was changing industry conversations. The response was overwhelming. By Monday morning, Paul's inbox was flooded with messages from other CEOs asking for advice, workers from other companies asking if Dickerson Dynamics was hiring, investors interested in ethical business models. CNBC wanted an interview. Harvard Business School wanted to write a case study. More importantly, 3 major clients, who'd been considering other contractors, decided to give Dickerson Dynamics their business specifically because of the company's values. The contracts were worth $80 million combined. At the emergency board meeting, Charles called to discuss the article. Paul walked in with updated financials. Profits are projected to be up 11% next quarter, he announced. We've gained 3 major contracts. Employee productivity has increased across all divisions. And our brand value, according to the latest assessment, has increased by 18%. Charles studied the numbers, his expression carefully neutral. This is unexpected. Treating people well is good business, Paul said simply. I'm not asking you to believe me on faith. I'm showing you the evidence. The vote of no confidence was rescinded. Paul stayed on as CEO. But more importantly, he'd proved that another way was possible. Not perfect, not without challenges, but possible. Summer arrived with the kind of gentle warmth that made Boston feel almost forgiving. Paul stood in his backyard, a space Charlotte had designed, full of roses she'd planted before she got sick, and thought about how different his life looked compared to 9 months ago. Joanna had moved to Boston permanently, buying a condo near his house. Someone needs to keep an eye on you, she'd said, but Paul knew she'd been lonely in Florida too, rattling around in a house too big for one person. They had dinner together twice a week now, and she'd started dating someone she'd met at her book club. Vivian had enrolled in a pre-med post-baccalaureate program. She'd cried for an hour when she accepted Paul's funding, insisting they draw up a formal agreement so it was a loan she could pay back someday. Paul had agreed, knowing he'd forgive the debt the moment she graduated, but understanding she needed to feel like she'd earned it. Lily visited often, her bright presence filling rooms that had been too quiet for too long. She taught Paul how to play Go Fish, and had decided his chef made the second-best grilled cheese sandwiches in the world. Second only to her mother's, of course. But there was still one thing Paul hadn't done. One envelope sitting in his desk drawer that he couldn't bring himself to open. Dr. Reeves had been pushing him for months. You're doing well, Paul. You're building a meaningful life. But you're still avoiding the hardest grief work, truly saying goodbye to Charlotte. I read her journal entries, Paul had protested. I talk about her in therapy. But you haven't read her final words to you. The letter she wrote specifically for this moment. Paul had changed the subject. Now, on the anniversary of meeting Vivian and Lily, exactly 9 months since they'd pulled him back from the edge, Paul finally opened his desk drawer and took out the envelope. Charlotte's handwriting on the front. For Paul, when you're ready. His hands shook as he opened it. My dearest Paul, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you've had some time to breathe without me watching you grieve. I wrote this letter 3 weeks before I died, on a morning when you'd gone to the office, and I had the house to myself. First, I need you to know, my death is not your fault. You couldn't have saved me. No amount of money or connections or frantically searching for experimental treatments would have changed the outcome. Please forgive yourself for being human. Second, I need you to promise me something. Don't let my death turn you into stone. Don't use grief as an excuse to stop living, stop caring, stop letting people in. I've watched you build walls your whole life, Paul, walls that kept everyone at a safe distance except me. I was the only one allowed inside, and that was beautiful, but it wasn't enough. You need more people in your life. You need messiness and connection, and the risk of loving others who might leave you too. It's scary, I know, but it's also what makes life worth living. Third, and this is the part you're really not going to like, I need you to look at what you've built with Dickerson Dynamics and ask yourself if you're proud of it. Not the money or the success, but the actual impact. Are you making the world better? Are you treating people with dignity? Are you using your privilege for something meaningful? I love you, Paul. I loved you when you were a brilliant, ambitious graduate student with $3 in your bank account. I loved you when you made your first million and treated me to a dinner so expensive I worried about the price. I loved you when you became the kind of powerful that most people only read about in newspapers. But I also watched you lose yourself in the pursuit of more. More money, more contracts, more influence. You started measuring your worth in quarterly reports instead of the quality of your character. And I let you, because I loved you and I didn't know how to tell you that you were disappearing. So here's what I'm asking in my last letter to you. Find yourself again. Figure out who Paul Dickerson is when he's not hiding behind CEO titles and board meetings. Connect with people who see your humanity, not your bank account. Use what you've built to actually help others, not just accumulate wealth. And Paul, let yourself love again. Not romantic love necessarily, though I wouldn't mind if you found someone eventually, but love in all its forms. Friends, family, community. Let people matter to you. I'm not afraid of dying, beloved. I'm afraid you'll use my death as an excuse to stop living. Please don't do that. Please honor my memory by being the man I always believed you could be. All my love, forever and always, Charlotte. Paul read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Then he called Vivian. I need to tell you something, he said when she answered. I read Charlotte's letter. Oh, Paul. Her voice was gentle. How are you? Okay, I think. Maybe better than okay. He looked out the window at Charlotte's roses, blooming despite her absence. She told me to find myself again, to use what I've built for good, to let people matter to me. It sounds like you've been doing exactly that. I'm trying. But Vivian, I need to ask you something. The Workers' Rights Foundation we've been talking about, I want to make it real. I want to fund it properly, build something sustainable that can actually make a difference for people, like the ones you see at the hospital, the ones falling through cracks in the system. Will you help me build it? There was a long pause. Paul, I'm starting school in September. I can't run a foundation. Not run it. Help design it. You know what people need, because you've lived it. I have resources, but no real understanding. Together, we could build something meaningful. What would Charlotte say? Paul smiled through his tears. She'd say that this is exactly the kind of thing I should be doing with my ridiculous amounts of money. They talked for 2 hours, sketching out ideas. A foundation that provided legal assistance to workers facing discrimination. Educational grants for people locked out of opportunities. Emergency funds for families facing medical crises. All the things Paul could have done years ago if he'd been paying attention. When they hung up, Paul went back to his desk and wrote a response to Charlotte's letter. Something Dr. Reeves had suggested months ago. Dear Charlotte, I'm trying. I'm not very good at it yet, but I'm trying. I've stopped measuring my worth in stock prices. I've let people in Vivian, Lily, Joanna, and others. I'm using what we built together to actually help people. I miss you every day. I still wake up reaching for you. I still hear your voice in quiet moments. But I'm not drowning anymore. I'm swimming slowly and clumsily towards something that feels like purpose. Thank you for loving me when I was lost. Thank you for this letter. Thank you for believing I could be better than I was. I'm going to keep trying to make you proud. Love, Paul. He folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer next to Charlotte's, then walked outside to the roses. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In 9 months, he'd gone from a man ready to die to a man building something worth living for. His phone buzzed. Lily, asking if he wanted to come to her school's spring concert next week. Paul smiled and typed back, wouldn't miss it. He stood among Charlotte's roses, feeling the evening breeze, and chose, deliberately, consciously, to keep living. Not just surviving, but actually living. Building, connecting, caring, trying. It wasn't perfect. Some days were still crushingly hard. Some nights he still cried himself to sleep. But he'd learned something crucial. You could hold grief in one hand and purpose in the other. You could miss someone desperately and still find reasons to get up in the morning. Paul Dickerson was 72 years old. He'd lost his wife. He'd almost lost himself. But he'd been saved by the unexpected compassion of a mother and daughter who'd refused to let him disappear. And now, standing in the garden Charlotte had planted, surrounded by evidence of her enduring love, Paul finally understood what she'd been trying to tell him all along. The point wasn't to get over grief. The point was to transform it into something meaningful. To take all that love that had nowhere to go and pour it into the world, into people, into work that actually mattered. He wasn't done grieving. He'd never be done. But he was done letting grief be the only thing that defined him. Inside the house, his phone rang again. Joanna, confirming dinner tomorrow. Another text from Vivian about foundation logistics. A reminder about his therapy appointment Thursday. Paul smiled and went inside, ready to continue the complicated, messy, worthwhile work of living. If this story touched your heart, if Paul's journey from that dark bridge to that summer garden made you believe in second chances, if Lily's purple coat and fearless compassion reminded you that we all have the power to save a life with simple kindness, then I need you to do 3 things for me. First, smash that subscribe button because we share stories like this every week. Stories that remind us what it means to be human. Second, hit the like button if you believe that sometimes our lowest moments lead to our greatest transformations. And third, and this is the most important one, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe they're struggling. Maybe they feel alone. Maybe they just need to be reminded that one conversation, one act of kindness, one person who refuses to let you disappear can change everything. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever been pulled back from the edge by an unexpected stranger? Or have you been the Lily or Vivian in someone else's story? I read every single comment, and your stories matter. Remember, you never know when your compassion might save a life. Be the person who asks, "Why are you crying?" Be the person who doesn't walk away. Be the lily in someone's darkest moment. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, and remember, your life matters more than you know. See you in the next story.